Just last month, the Neskantaga First Nation, northeast of Thunder Bay, declared a state of emergency following 2 suicides in just 1 week. Joining us now with more, in Thunder Bay, Ontario, the chief of the Neskantaga First Nation, Peter Munius. Chief Munius, it's awfully good of you to join us on the line from Thunder Bay, and I think just because a lot of people down here in the south in particular don't know much about your community, we're going to put a map up and show everybody where you are. And we would hope that you would just start out by telling us a little bit about your community. Tell us about it.
Okay, Neskantaga First Nation is known as also as Lansdowne House, Ontario. For those of you that don't know, Neskantaga was formed somewhere in the 1980s as a reserve when we became a reservation in that community. The population at this time is about 4 plus, maybe 430 somewhere. And then the population is a very young population. About 75% of the is young people under 40 years. That's the size of the community. The community has all kinds of problems like water problems, things like that. And we have about 85 houses in the community. We have an airport. That's a remote community.
So people can only get to the community by flying in, is that right?
Yes, yes.
And what do people do for work there?
Well, we worked on programs like government make-work programs, such as some of us work in the office, some of us work at the nursing station, the medical center, and some do work a little projects that whatever little funding that we get from the government agencies. That's about all we have on job-wise. Of course, there's a Northwest Company there that provides groceries, and it's a store that provides groceries, merchandise, other merchandise, and about 5 or 6 people work there, and that's about the workforce right now.
Have you got a school?
We got a school, and we got teachers from Southern Ontario, and I think all around the maritime areas, some of them come from. And we have a local staff, maybe of 4 people there that work as teacher aides or other like janitorial position.
Okay, thank you for explaining the lay of the land to us. Now let's focus in on the issue at hand, which is why you felt a need to declare a state of emergency. Let us into your thinking, if you would.
Okay, we, at that time, when we lost the last 2 suicides, devastated our community so bad that our people were just in shock. They didn't know how to look after themselves. They didn't know what to do. They didn't feed themselves and all that. So there was lack of help in the community from for us as a chief and council. And we lost a 35-year-old. And then shortly after that, 4 days after, we lost another 19-year-old. And before that, we had lost a couple of youth within the span of maybe 3 months, 2 months. And then we had about 20 attempts of suicide. And it was really devastating getting to be the feeling that the community had no hope. You know, we're expecting that another suicide would happen shortly after another one. So the only way that we could get some help was to declare a state of emergency, and that's what we did. And help came on the way in small scale, nothing big.
Okay,
you know, the crisis teams came in, and that's how we managed to survive in the first few days there.
Just before I ask you more about the nature of the help that you got, did any of the people who committed suicide leave a note?
None of them, I don't think so. I haven't heard nothing about that. And
So do you have any sense as to why they did it?
well, we know for a fact that one of these were 35-year-old. The 35-year-old, he had been on a higher risk list for quite a while, maybe 2 years, and nothing was done about it to help him. When he was medevaced out a couple of times to the zone hospital in Solicout, only to be sent back maybe a day or two after, because there was no. I don't think Solicout is equipped to accommodate those kind of people to do any full assessment on the young man himself.
When you say those kind of people, do you mean somebody suffering from mental health issues?
Yeah, a lot of these people are suffering from despair, from different issues, like there's lack of resources, lack of mental health programs, lack of other resources like recreational facilities or stuff like that, and they walk around with no sense of belonging, no hope. You know, that's how we notice that that's happening, and the fact that we live in that community, and there are a lot of things why the root causes of that community that leads them to be like that.
Mm-hmm. When the crisis response teams arrive, is there anything that they can really do?
The crisis response team, mainly they come in there just to stabilize the community or watch these people, you know, on a 24-hour basis when they come in. And because when you hear the suicide has happened in your community, somebody died, your relative, or whether it's your relative or not, it still affects the community, because the community is a close-knit community that mostly half of the community is related to each other somewhere, one way or the other.
Of course, but do the professionals who come in with this crisis response unit, do they give you advice on how to ensure that this doesn't happen anymore?
Well, they do give us advice, and then again, they can only do it on the basis of time they're given to come to the community, like depending on how much funding they got. You know, that's within maybe 1 week. Before that, it used to be just a couple of days after the funeral. That's it, and they're gone.
Chief, I'm going to ask you the hard question that I suspect many people watching this are thinking right now, which is, we know you love your people, we know you love your community, but is it possible that you're just not sustainable? 400-odd people living so far up north, so remotely, in the absence of resources and services that you need, maybe this community doesn't have a future. Is that possible?
No, I think the community has a future. And it's just the fact that we're not being included in the mainstream of development, like the ring of fire that's coming that way. Until we start to stand up and fight and make noise, we were recognized as one of the impacted communities. Before that, they didn't know that we existed, you know. And I think the future for this community is to be sustainable. And we want to be sustain ourselves from the development. We want to be part of that development. And I think my community has a good future if it's supported the right way.
So just so I'm clear here, you think that once the Ring of Fire is developed, your community will prosper, become more resilient, then it will have a future? Is that right?
Yes. As long as we have revenue sharing with whatever resources come out of there, you know, in the way of revenue sharing with the government agents, government, and the two levels of government that we have, you know. We have to make a deal. We have to make deals with that. And that way, our community will be sustaining themselves that we'll be able to provide those services that our community needs right now.
Understood. Chief Muniz, it's awfully good of you to join us from Thunder Bay. We're going to broaden our discussion in just a moment. We thank you, though, for setting the table, as it were, for the discussion to come about Aboriginal mental health, which, of course, is one of the most grievous issues in the country today. So thank you, Chief, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, before we have that discussion I just referenced, we want you to have a look, first of all, at one woman's story of her battle with substance abuse, and then we're going to come back and talk. Roll tape, please.
Growing up in Winnipeg, there's a large population of Aboriginal people there. It's hard to see Native people sleeping on the streets, and knowing from the past that there is a cycle that happens, and wondering if you're going to get caught up in it or not.
Tomorrow's story. Okay, Neskantaga and other remote First Nations in the Anishinaabe Nation face a much higher suicide rate than the rest of Canada, but there have been some success stories as well. Some First Nations saw a decline in the number of suicides, and some have none at all. And we're here tonight to ask how come. And now to help answer that question with us in studio, Sasha Miracle. She's a member of the Ontario First Nations Young People's Council and a co-chair of the National Youth Council at the Assembly of First Nations. Also with us, Cornelia Wyman, Aboriginal psychiatrist and Indigenous health researcher at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH. And Chris Lalonde, he's co-director with the Centre for Aboriginal Health Research at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. And of course, as we've been doing all week long, we'd love to hear from you on this topic as well. Our producers are hosting a live chat right now with a representative from the mental health hotline, Connects Ontario. You can find that on our website, theagenda.tvo.org. Go there right now. They're standing by. You can also join us via Twitter, so chime in with that conversation. We have two hashtags for you to use, hashtag MHMatters, Mental Health Matters, and hashtag AgendaTVO. Okay, to the three of you here at this table, thank you very much for being here. I want to start by, okay, Cornelia, you first. What'd you think when you heard about the situation that has happened up in Neskantaga with these awful, so disproportional to the rest of the population number of suicides?
Right. So I think what Chief Muniz was describing is probably one of the worst case scenarios that several or many of our communities across the country find themselves in. So he mentioned what we refer to as the social determinants of mental health. So he mentioned that in the community they have problems with their water, perhaps crowding in their housing situations. He didn't mention other issues that may be going on that are quite prominent in some remote communities, like prescription drug abuse and other substance abuse issues that may be going on in that community. And then on top of that, there is a lack of access to health services and mental health services specifically in that community. So it all kind of combines into what ultimately develops as a crisis, where you have a cluster of suicides and the community just doesn't have the resources to manage that.
Sasha, what did you think when you heard?
I have to agree with yourself and with Chief Muniz. It's about the social determinants of health. Our young people need opportunities, and there's just an overall lack of hope in a lot of our communities, whether they're remote, isolated northern communities or whether they're in your backyard in southern Ontario. Our young people need something to look forward to, which also calls for the need for job creation, recreation programs, parenting skills, you name it. We need it, and like you were saying, it's almost like a perfect conglomeration or a perfect storm being developed in these communities. Without these essential services in place, we're just allowing our young people to slip through the cracks.
Chris, the hope would be that this is rare in our country. Is it?
It is rare, even though the rates of suicide are higher for Aboriginal people in Canada. Suicide is still a relatively rare event. And one of the aspects of this really tragic story is that often people will get the impression that suicide is an epidemic in the Aboriginal population. And it's not. We have some good evidence that there are lots of communities in which suicide is unknown. And I think as much as we need to provide resources to communities where there are tragedies, I think we also need to learn from communities in which youth are developing in a healthy way. They're embracing their culture and they're doing fine.
Even in communities as remote as this one?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, I'd like to have one other person join us at our literal table here, but she will join us figuratively around the table. Jocelyn Formsma is a law student and intern at the Anishinaabe Nation. She joins us on the line from Thunder Bay now. And Jocelyn, I just ask you the same question off the top, which is when you heard about the disproportionate number of suicides, I guess closer in the province to where you are, but still a long way from Thunder Bay, what were you thinking?
Well, it's really sad to hear about the suicides, and my family's from Moose Cree First Nation, and even though I'm not living in the community, every time I hear about attempts or completed suicides, it makes me very sad, and I feel affected even though I'm far away physically.
We have some statistics that we want to share with you and our audience right now to help put some of this into perspective, as Chris just suggested. This isn't the first time, obviously, that First Nations communities in NAN have faced high suicide rates. A study of suicides in NAN communities from 1986 to 2012 found the following. There have been 400 deaths by suicide in the 26 remote First Nations in Anishinaabe Nation since 1978. The suicide rate is about 8 times the national rate and 3 times the national Aboriginal rate. If we talk about youth from the ages of 10 to 14, the suicide rate is 45 times the national rate and 42 times the national average for youth aged 15 to 19. And the rates in some communities were as high as 360 per 100,000 and more than 400 for some age groups, and yet some communities were suicide-free. Jocelyn, you grew up in Anishinaabe Nation, so I want to continue with you. You've sat on the Youth Council as well, and I want to know what comes to mind when you look at these numbers?
Well, I think what's really well documented is the plight of a lot of these First Nations, as you mentioned. I mean, those numbers are just atrocious. But over half of the communities in NAN territory had either no suicides in the last 8 years or only 1 suicide in the last 8 years. And the work that we tried to do with the Anishinaabe Nation, we had heard about the statistics. The Chiefs in Assembly said we got to do something about this. They dedicated 10 years to youth leadership development. And in that time, the Decade for Youth Council was formed, and now it's called Oshkatisak. And we developed a youth foundation. We had an annual 7 Sacred Teachings conference. We developed Girl Power, Wolf Spirit training, which is youth leadership and youth empowerment. We partnered with 7 Youth Media so that youth had an outlet for their art and for their ideas and their writing. We visited communities, we developed youth councils, we did strategic planning on factors of success. We had volunteers on the Youth Council from all different kinds of backgrounds, and for that 10 years, and even since then, I think it's been about 13 years, we've actually tried really, really hard as a Youth Council to bring the youth voice forward and try to give some of the narrative that shows the other side of it. So we recognize that there are so many needs in these communities, and we tried to provide a voice for the young people that were coming from those communities. But we also wanted to showcase that, the Indigenous youth coming from these communities are actually trying really hard, and that a lot of times what they really need is the support and the capacity to just complete their visions that they have, because they have incredible ideas and hope and really want to move their communities forward for themselves, for their peers, for their brothers and sisters, and for their children a lot of times. But that capacity and that support really is lacking in a lot of times.
Well, we have one of those young Ontario voices here right now. You're chair of the Ontario Youth Council, you're not, Sasha?
I'm actually just a member of the Ontario Youth Council.
I'll make you the chairman, what the heck. I'll make you the chair. Do you have any theories as to why in some communities these suicide rates are off the charts and in other it's just not a factor at all?
There is no real explanation as far as I'm concerned to say the haves from the have-not communities. I think each and every one of us have been touched by suicide in some way, shape, or form. Even if it is a community that has had 0 attempts, they're usually neighboring with a community or share relatives with a community who has gone through it. So it's something that reaches out and impacts all Aboriginal people to a larger degree than the average Canadian citizen. But I noticed, I've talked with a lot of young people, and a lot of them, that the communities that aren't experiencing these issues as profoundly as some others, they make reference to the involvement that they've had in their communities or the inclusion. Chief and Council has gone out of their way to make sure that the young voices are heard in the community and they're part of the plans going forward. Or there's recreation programs for the young people in the community. They have community centers that they can go to after hours if they're living in unsafe environments.
That sounded like a real problem for Chief Muniz.
Yes.
Just nothing in terms of recreational activities up there to do.
Well, further to that, but also looking at Chief Muniz's statement about the fact that there's 400 plus residents in the community and only 80 homes. That's a huge issue. Overcrowding of the young people in the homes, the lack of opportunity available on some of our First Nations communities, all of these things factor into I guess the rates and the realities of suicide in our communities.
Chris, let me follow up with you. And again, do you have any theories as to why some communities would be overrun by suicide, just proportionately speaking, and others it's not a factor at all?
Well, we've been studying that in British Columbia and now in Manitoba, and asking what is it that's true about those communities where the suicide rates are low or zero. And what we've discovered is that communities that have enjoyed success in holding on to their cultural past and enjoyed success in controlling their own collective futures, those are the ones with the lower suicide rates. So if you look at community control over education or health services or police and fire services, suicide rates are lower in communities that control those things. Suicide rates are lower in communities that have built buildings for cultural purposes. So you could have cultural events in the school gymnasium or the church basement, but it says something about a community that it's important enough to us to build this building for which to hold ceremonial purposes, and suicide rates are lower in those communities. So I think that tells you something useful. I mean, I think it's maybe more useful than pointing out all the communities that have high suicide rates.
What do you infer from all of those numbers?
Well, I think both of my fellow panelists bring up issues where there's, it's not just symptoms of mental illness that are the difficulties in these communities. It's the broader sort of makeup of the communities and how well the youth participate in the vitality of that community. And
Sounds like mental illness is a result of rather than the cause of. You know what I'm saying? It
Yeah.
comes as a result of all of the things that are not there.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I think there's some etiological reasons too why people develop mental illness. But I think really what we're partly talking about is the young people being able to form a healthy sense of identity. That's the thing that I think I see the most, is that how do you envision yourself moving forward into the future? How do you actually do that? And if you don't have positive role models, for example, I mean, I think I've had the privilege of serving on the board of directors of the Inspire Foundation for the last number of years, which used to be the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation. And there are people who are artists, teachers, lawyers, doctors, traditional healers, spiritual people that the young people get to be exposed to.
Role models.
And if you're not exposed to those types of folks, then you never see that for yourself in your future. And I think that's something that Aboriginal young people really struggle with, is how do they meld that sense of themselves as, being part of their community, but also being able to exist in contemporary times. And be a part of their community where they have a say in their health services or a say in their police and fire services. And I think part of the issue I think Jocelyn spoke to is having the resources to be able to do that. So having people get the proper training, education, et cetera, and being able to go back to their community and be a vital contributing member of that community.
I want to follow up with Jocelyn on something she talked about earlier, and that is, do I assume that you have firsthand experience with friends who have attempted or committed suicide, Jocelyn?
I have. I had friends that have both attempted and completed suicides.
I know this is personal, and I don't want to push it too far on this, but the factors that were in play, can you help us understand what they were?
I really couldn't say for each individual. I know that how it have affected me was was to feel a lot of sadness and a little bit of anger even, because for a good friend to feel that they had to go to that extent without talking to me or reaching out thinking that I would be a resource to that individual. It was really hard to say what it was that led them to take those steps. So,
But presumably a sense of utter hopelessness was a factor?
I couldn't say. I mean, for the people, they were from different communities, different life circumstances. So I really have a hard time saying, what really led them to that decision.
Okay, fair enough. I'm not trying to. I don't mean to go on a fishing expedition here or something like that. But let me introduce another fact here, which is Pikangikum, which is another Anishinaabe nation, has faced high suicide rates and gone through its own crisis. And here's what the chief wrote in his report reviewing the deaths of 16 young people. This was a couple of years ago. He wrote this: "The children and youth of Pikangikum have been taking their lives at an extraordinary rate for a number of years. The themes that emerged from a review of the circumstances of the deaths and the lives of the youth was not a story of capitulation to death, but rather a story of stamina, endurance, tolerance, and resiliency stretched beyond human limits until finally they simply could take no more." Cornelia, what do we know about the causes of deaths in First Nations communities like Pikangikum and Neskantaga that we've been talking about today?
Well, I actually had the honor of sitting on that review panel, so I know a little bit of the background of that report. And I agree with what you just read that the chief wrote, that I think sometimes when we hear about things like this in the popular media, we just make the assumption that, oh, these people are full of despair and they have so many problems and issues that, that's just the reason why young people kill themselves. But I think all of us sitting around the table like to look at it from the point of that we are resilient people, that our young people are resilient, and perhaps in these situations they found themselves with no other options. One of the things that I get that concerns me, both as a psychiatrist and as a mental health researcher, is it seems that there is some proportion of young people who kill themselves or attempt to kill themselves in under very impulsive conditions. And so, for example, you hear time and time again the story, well, the young person seemed fine at breakfast, they went off to school. They may have got into an argument with their partner, or girlfriend, or boyfriend, and 4 hours later, they're dead. And so as a suicide, as a researcher and a suicide, someone who's interested in prevention, how do you do that? How do you develop suicide prevention programs for those communities, for young people who seemingly are perfectly well in the morning, and by the evening, they've decided that that's their only option, right? So I think that's part of what we need to kind of figure out as well.
What can you tell us, Sasha, about what you know of the resiliency of young people in First Nations?
Well, I've had the opportunity to participate in a number of national youth suicide prevention forums, and some of the young people, I think, feel an onus to be resilient for their communities. Our ancestors and a lot of our leadership before us have stood up to make sure that we live a better quality of life, and I think that weighs heavily on a lot of our young people's shoulders. Like, just in reference to something Jocelyn said, the one thing that I came to discover during those forums is that there was a lot of stories about young people who were carrying a lot of burden, it felt like, for their communities, or were looked at as a role model for the communities, and felt, I guess,
Too much pressure?
Too much pressure from some of their peers and some of the elders or older people in the community, and they've decided to take their life. So, like Jocelyn was saying, there's no one true factor that can be identified as, that was what that person was dealing with, and that's why they took their life. But a lot of the time, it's a multitude of things that are contributing to somebody's thoughts. And another thing that was mentioned was the impulse. I know that a number of reports have been issued showing that a lot of our young people are dealing with issues around binge drinking and substance abuse. So a lot of the time that when those decisions are made, they're made under the influence, and And those are things that we need to deal with too. We understand that these are some of the challenges that our young people are dealing with, and we need to come up with the appropriate policies and strategies within our nations to make sure that we're addressing these things before they happen. And also what was made reference to was, you know, how do you really know when to step in or intervene with a young person when they're fine at breakfast time and by dinner they've contemplated suicide? But a lot of our communities are working on intervention strategies where they're opening the community to remove stigma from the topic of suicide, where there's talking circles, there's safe talk exercises, there's assist training being provided at our communities so that these young people start to remove stigma and start to think about the damage that can be caused by the actions that they take.
Okay, but you're Six Nations, right?
Yes.
So Brantford, 2 hours from here,
Yes.
essentially. Do you have these issues on Six Nations?
Yes, Six Nations has had a few suicides over a number of years, and because we're a larger community, I think sometimes the suicide of one young person goes unnoticed, whereas or not unnoticed, but it's less of an issue versus a community with 400 where you're seeing 3 or 4 suicides. It seems to be that it is more of an epidemic in those communities, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist in Southern First Nations.
Chris, is there an advantage to being a First Nations person in a much more urban setting, as Six Nations would be, than rather in a remote place in northwestern Ontario?
No, I mean, I think a lot of people have that thought, and when we looked at the data to say, is the suicide rate higher in urban, rural, remote, and what are called special access communities? And there wasn't a clear pattern there, at least not one that made some kind of geographic sense. So it's not so much what services are available in the community, it's the community's level of control of those services that seems to be what really makes the difference. And if, you know, there's a kind of a tension between trying to understand why an individual young person would take their own life. I mean, we all struggle with that. We can't imagine why would this ever have happened. And understanding suicide as a kind of societal level phenomenon. So people have said that the job of adolescents is to build a sense of identity. Okay? And if they're doing that in the environment and with what's made available to them by their culture. Okay, so if you think about the process, you almost have no suicide before the age of 10, and then for First Nations people, it shoots up in adolescence and young adulthood, and then it trails off, and for much of the lifespan is lower than the rest of the population. So this is a phenomenon that's very much concentrated in the youth population, and I think we need to understand that, and we need to understand what youth need to create a healthy sense of identity.
If you can get past those difficult
right.
years,
Yes.
the prognosis looks good
In
then.
fact, for First Nations women, I think it was the age of 32, the risk drops and stays below the rest of the population for the rest of their lifespan. So it's not a feature of these communities in that sense. Otherwise, the suicide rate you would expect would be equally high for all ages, and it's not. It's concentrated in young people.
Jocelyn, I wonder if I could get you to follow up on something Sasha just told us, which is this kind of pressure for young First Nations kids nowadays to live up to the stories of their past, to live up to the culture, to live up to that burden of being a First Nations person in Canada today. How difficult is that?
I think it can be extremely difficult at times. Certainly I've felt the pressure, more of an obligation to do more and to be more because of my past and because of my heritage. And I think it can be overwhelming for some people, but I think the factors of success for me really have lied in having a very strong identity and having really strong roots in my culture, having my family be really supportive and strong behind me. And then I think the other piece of that is that I've had a relatively trauma-free life. So I've been able to take the steps in stride as I've, initially when I started working, and then when I went to university, and then now, within law school. So it's, every time you take that step, you need a strong foundation underneath you in order to take those steps further. And sometimes maybe that foundation just isn't there for some people, and then the pressure gets to be too much without that support behind them.
Jocelyn, I'm going to ask you a really uncomfortable, direct question. And if you don't want to answer it, you tell me to buzz off, okay?
Okay.
Have you ever thought about it?
I have not. There was a time when I was a teenager, pretty much within the range that Dr. Lalonde had mentioned, where I felt that I was in a very dark place, and it was not a good place. But I had never seriously considered ever completing or attempting a suicide or completing a suicide.
That dark place that you were in, how would you characterize it?
It's really hard to, I'm thinking back on it now, sort of, hindsight 2020. But at the time, it was like I had a hard time getting out of bed, and I think it probably could have been classified as depression, although it wasn't. It wasn't diagnosed as such. I had a hard time getting out of bed. My emotions were all over the place. I wasn't interested in doing anything. At the time I was still in school. I lost interest in school. I didn't want to participate in any community activities. I think the only people that I spent time with were my family and my friends, and it was just a strange feeling of lack of interest and just trying to constantly deal with emotions that I had to figure out how to deal with.
Well, you obviously seem 180 degrees removed from that. You are obviously a talented, sharp, smart person today. So how did you get through all that?
Actually, it was through a relationship with a friend. I think we met each other at a really good time because I think we both needed each other. And I had started getting involved with the Friendship Center movement, which was a really wonderful thing for me. They taught me a lot about my history. I was mentored very well, and I was able to participate in a national meeting that had a youth engagement component to it. And so I was meeting other young people from all across Canada, and I connected with this one individual, and we had one evening where we talked about everything, and I was able to tell her every personal thing that I wasn't able to tell even some of my closest friends, and it seemed to be the light, I guess, that brought me forward. And then at the same time, all these other things were going on. And as I was learning about my past, I was learning about my history, I was learning about residential schools, the pieces started to come together, and I really was able to see myself in a larger picture, I guess. And then it was after that conference and that I really was like, okay, I've got to do something here. I've got to, pick up myself, and I've got to figure out what it is that I need to move forward.
Thank you for sharing all that with us, and thanks for not telling me to buzz off. I really appreciate it. But Sasha, I'm coming at you now. Have you ever had any of these kind of dark thoughts before?
I think I share a similar story to that of Jocelyn. I had my own issues. I walked a different kind of path when I was first coming along. I didn't have a desire to complete high school. Thought dropping out may be a better option. Felt a little bit of a sense of self-worthlessness sometimes, and I even had at points educators tell me that I wouldn't succeed, and I didn't know whether that was because I was being a victim of racism or being discriminated upon as an Indigenous student, or if it was just sheerly my lack of desire to do things that was coming through. But it was a few of those teachers, and like Jocelyn said, strong support networks at home that made sure that I didn't go down that other path, that I didn't choose to make any decisions that I couldn't choose to unmake. So I really do have to say that it's vital for our young people to build those bonds and to have mentors and to have somebody to talk to. Just recently at the Feathers of Hope conference organized by the Children's Youth and Provincial Advocates Office.
What is that? Feathers of Hope conference? What is that?
It was a conference organized for 91 communities in Northern Ontario, so focusing on Grand Council Treaty 3 and Anishinaabe-Aski Nation, and looking at issues just like this. And this just happened in March. And where the young people were there, a number of them had shared stories about contemplating suicide, some of the things and challenges and barriers they experienced in their communities to being successful, but just being aware that they had other peers in the room from different communities who were experiencing the same challenges was very uplifting to the young people that were there. They knew that there was other people that they could reach out to and find that kind of support that they needed. So it's, I guess, it sounds funny to say, you know, plan conferences here and there, but I mean, it really does work to bring our young people together and to give them those support networks that they need to make sure that they're healthy carrying on into the future.
Gotcha. Chris, I want to follow up with you on this because I suspect anybody in the rest of Canada, meaning non-Indigenous Canada, listening to this or watching this, would want to somehow intervene, would want to contribute, to help. How do we do that?
Well, I think first you need good data on the size and scope of the problem. One of the tragedies of taking there is an epidemic view of suicide in the Aboriginal population is that you are rushed to intervene in some way, but what you end up doing is you're providing resources to communities that don't need it and withholding it from communities that desperately need it. Now, if you had a better idea where suicides were happening, which communities were really in need of help, you'd be better armed to
Don't we know that
something
now?
about it. Well, it turns out that the data is really hard to come by because First Nations health data, some of it is held by provincial agencies, some of it's held by the federal government, and they don't communicate very well. So doing the kind of work that I do is made more difficult by having trouble accessing data. So if we had a better idea of the problem, we'd know better where the help was needed, and I think we could do a better job of that.
Let me follow up with this. I coincidentally went to a speech this morning by Ontario's Minister of Rural Affairs, a guy named Jeff Leal from Peterborough. And in Peterborough, which is not exactly, remote, but it's not exactly urban either. It's somewhere in between. He mentioned he has 2 reserves, and he said the federal and he clarified that he was speaking for himself here as a ordinary MPP as opposed to as a minister of the Crown. He wasn't making government policy by saying this, but he was saying the federal government does a pretty terrible job of providing health services to First Nations people because they do so little of it. Most of the health care provided in this country is provided by provinces. And that one of the ways we could improve things a lot would be to have the federal government just give the provinces the money and have them actually provide those frontline services. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, it probably does. I mean, I think the issue is if you want to close the health gap between Aboriginal Canadians and other Canadians, then you're going to have to do something different. You're going to have to try and take a different approach. And I think things like Jordan's principle, where the idea is first heal the child, then worry about the money, I think is a good way to start. And I think there are lots of other ways in which that kind of an approach would be more effective than the way we're doing things now.
Cornelia, how about the issue of how the rest of us, and I want to be careful of the word I use here because intervene sounds like it's against the will of, but contribute, help. What do we do?
Well, I think what I hear over and over again from different communities is that there are unique factors to communities or groups of communities. And if the way that it is now with healthcare providers, that the majority of healthcare providers are non-Aboriginal, right? We have very few Aboriginal physicians. We have a little more nurses. We have, I think, only 4 or 5 psychiatrists. So, the majority in the whole country. Yeah.
You're one of 4 or 5 in the whole country?
Yeah. And I think, so we have to accept that the health services will be provided by non-Aboriginal people by and large.
Is that problematic?
It is and it isn't, actually. There's been a lot of work done in the area of what's called cultural safety. It used to be called cultural competence, about how you can modify services to be more respectful and more of a partnership between the so-called patient and provider. But I think the point I was trying to make was, I think because the communities themselves with their unique views need to be listened to before people sort of pounce on the community and go, this is what I think would be great for you and what would solve your suicide problem, right? There needs to be a whole process of engagement of, I think the community has some idea of what would be helpful to them. And so if we go in without listening first, I think that's ultimately not going to be all that helpful and probably not sustainable for the overall health of that community.
Jocelyn, I must say I've been, I think impressed is the right word, but maybe you'll correct me. Let's just say I have noted that so far in this whole program tonight, which we're about 45 minutes into our discussion right now, nobody has said, this is all the fault of the white man, this is all the fault of the federal government, this is all because you don't give us enough money. Is that because you're too polite to say it? or do you believe it?
I don't think so. I think that youth engagement and youth empowerment is an attitude. It's not a program. I think it'll exist whether or not a community has the funds to do so. There are definitely some real infrastructure needs that will require dollars, buildings, for example, houses, schools, those kinds of things. But ultimately, as I mentioned, culture, identity, family, and support really can find a way in without funds. I think the attitude and the idea has to be there first. Now, if we look at money that's going to be spent, it has to be in a coordinated fashion, it has to be strategic, and I definitely think that it has to be done with the input of the young people that are going to be affected by the programs and services. Otherwise, you're just pouring money down the drain, and so I think the money comes afterwards. And I think that there is definitely a role to play for non-Indigenous Canadians to acknowledge the past that we have, the history that we have a role to play, but that ultimately has to be led by Indigenous people and in circumstances like this, especially Indigenous children and youth.
Sasha, you want to follow up on that?
No, I think between the last two panelists, they hit the nail right on the head. It's not always about the resources. Mind you, I'm not hiding the fact that there's desperate need for resources and a holistic approach to health and wellness in our communities, because as soon as we start thinking these in siloed approaches, that's when we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot. And what Jocelyn was saying about young people being involved from the onset, and the suggestion that the province maybe administer health care for First Nations, it's typically not a well-accepted idea within our communities, because we do have a voice, and we should have a voice in determining what health care and what wellness looks like for our own people. So to have somebody pass that service down to us and say, here's the model that fits all, it just doesn't work in First Nations communities, or it hasn't been very successful in the past. And I think that kind of speaks to the intervention point too. We do need supports coming into the community, but in general, we need the Canadian public to understand the issues that we're dealing with in order to be a part of creating the solutions going forward.
Do you think Canadians don't understand? After Idle No More and after everything, Canadians still don't know, you think?
I still don't think that their eyes are open to their true circumstances going on in their own backyard. We have communities like KI way up north and bordering some of these nations that we've been talking about today that have been actively taking measures to try and increase that awareness out there in Canada. They've done a video called Third World Canada to highlight the healthcare issues in their communities and the lack of services available for their young people around suicide prevention. They're also recently launching a competition, or not a competition, they're asking Canadians. They've made 25 seats available for Canadians to come into the community of KI to experience what it's like to live in the remote northern First Nations parts of Ontario. And it's the young people that are leading that change in collaboration with their leaders. So I think it's things like that are going to be what leads to the success and to the realization for the rest of Canada on what we're really actually dealing with in these communities.
You mentioned a video, and I want to play a video now. This is, Allison, you did this interview, didn't you? Okay, this is producer Allison Buckenterrell, who interviewed Brennan Sainawap, who is executive officer at Wapakeka First Nation, about how his community tackled its own suicide crisis. Let's play this clip. It's about a minute and a half, and then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape, please.
And 2009 is when we started what we call our safety net program. And that was through Tikanagan Child Family Services. And it was supported by the then Deputy Grand Chief, Jim Morris. And he helped us along with a lot of, but 3 other communities, our neighboring communities, because the last suicide at that time was a 12-year-old, and it devastated the whole community. And the whole community itself could not function because of that. And it was with the help with the neighboring communities that we were able to slowly do what we needed to do as a community to to move on and to try help ourselves. We started off trying to get our young people, I guess, more involved or more busy rather than them not doing anything at all. We started to have sports, events, dances, that kind of stuff, just to keep the kids occupied. And as well, we started to ask our community members, the parents, to become more involved in helping our youth. And that's what we were concentrating on, was trying to get those people to realize there's more to life than what they were looking at right at the moment.
Chris, are there lessons from that experience that can be applied elsewhere?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a developmental psychologist by training, so I'm interested in how young people create a sense of identity, particularly across adolescence. And all of the work that I've done with First Nations across the country boils down to one simple thing, and that is promoting culture promotes health. So if you want to lower the suicide rates, you don't necessarily need to target suicide itself. That is, if you target those other things that create the sort of supportive environments in which young people can grow and develop, then it will have the side effect of lowering the suicide rate. So anything that you can do to support healthy youth development will work. So promoting culture promotes health.
How did you discover that? Promoting culture promotes health.
It's a very long story about how I got involved in this research, but...
You can tell 2 minutes of that story, because that's how much time we have left.
What we were interested in is, if you look at any culture, for a culture to persist, to endure, it has to do two things. One is it has to have a sense of ownership of its own past, and it has to have a sense of commitment to its own collective future. So that's true of cultures. It's also true of individual young people. So you were asking earlier whether people had contemplated suicide, and almost everyone will admit that they won't say I contemplated it, they'll say it crossed my mind. And they say, you know, I didn't start writing a note and I didn't go buy a rope or anything, but it was a particularly bad time in my life. And now what pushes that thought out of your head is your own sense of ownership of your own past and commitment to the person you're becoming. If you lose that, then you're in trouble for acting impulsively on even transient self-destructive thoughts. So now if you sort of bump that explanation up to the level of a whole community, how does a community have a sense of ownership of its own past and a sense of control or ownership of a collective future? Well, we asked ourselves that, and we asked how could we measure that in 203 communities in British Columbia, and we came up with a number of things. So some of them, as I mentioned, were simple civic control of police and fire, schools and health. Others in British Columbia, we looked at how the communities have tried to gain or maintain access to traditional lands and territories. So unlike most of the rest of Canada, there are very few treaties signed in British Columbia. So we looked at the history of land claims, litigation, and negotiation. And the communities with longer histories had lower suicide rates. Okay, so we look for things that measure the extent to which the community has been able to hold on to their past or control their own future. So we're now doing another project in Manitoba to try and find out, what does that mean for Manitoba First Nations? How is it that they enact this ownership of their past and control of their own future in the treaty territories of Manitoba? So we've been working with Assembly of Manitoba chiefs and communities within each of the 5 cultural territories to try and get their definitions and see if we can do in Manitoba what we've done in British Columbia.
Fascinating and done in less than 2 minutes. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for coming on the program tonight and really helping us understand this subject much better. Starting up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, with Jocelyn Formsma, the law student from the University of Ottawa, the intern with the Anishinaabe Nation. Jocelyn, thanks so much for being there on the line from Thunder Bay for us, okay?
Thank you.
Great to have you on tonight. And here in our studio, Sasha Miracle, Ontario First Nations Young People's Council, Dr. Cornelia Wyman, Aboriginal psychiatrist and Indigenous Health Research at CAMH, Christopher Lalonde, co-director of the Centre for Aboriginal Health Research at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.